Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Composer's Cut podcast. I am your host, Matthew Arrellín. I'm a composer and cellist based in Chicago, and I'm super excited about today's episode. I got to sit down with the legendary composer Chaya Czernowin, and in this episode, Chaya and I talked about how she thinks about her music, specific considerations about her materials, how she approaches sculpting her materials into life. She described her materials almost like creatures that have their own ambitions and their own desires, and that writing her music is a way of helping them to manifest those desires. And as I was listening to her music and immersing myself in it this last week, I really had this sense of that living quality and the evocative kind of textures that she creates. One of the things that came up, which was fascinating, was an idea of how in music you can create distortions of time and space in ways that in reality we cannot. Chaya also used specific examples of her music to exemplify these concepts, and we talked about Atara for orchestra, we talked about Etzov for string quartet, and at the end of the conversation, we also spoke about her new piece that's going to be performed at the end of April of this year, 2025, at the time of this recording. It's going to be performed by the LA Philharmonic. It's a piece called No, a Lament for the Innocent. And so I'll leave links for all of these pieces in the description, as well as a link to the event so that if you're interested or if you're in the LA area, you can go to the premiere. It's also going to be performed in other cities in Europe. I'm going to leave a link in the description so that if you are in those cities, you definitely have the opportunity and chance to check out this performance. I think it's going to be an extremely moving and evocative work. I think it's going to resonate with audiences, particularly in this moment in time. And so without further ado, here's my conversation with composer Chaya Czernowin. Chaya, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me to talk about your music and compositional process. I'm very excited to learn more about your work and what you have to say about your music.
Thank you for asking me to talk about this, and nice to meet you in this spring day.
Nice to meet you as well. The very first time that I interacted with you was in the Harvard colloquium where I presented my music, because at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, but Northwestern University, where I did my PhD, and Harvard had this exchange program where composers from each department would sort of swap and
I
present one
think this is
class.
still the case, as
Oh,
far
great.
as I remember. Mhm.
So when it was my turn that year, I remember that you mentioned at some point in the talk this idea of going through periods of sameness as a composer where you're writing the same piece over and over again and you don't really know how to break through the threshold of doing the same thing over and over. And it was a very profound statement for me, and I feel that I contemplated it for many years, and to this day when I think about you I remember this idea. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that idea of going through periods of the sameness, of repeating yourself, of not finding new materials, or maybe, what could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I I do not remember the circumstances of our talk and what it refers to. I can tell you how I would relate, how do I think about the idea of sameness and repeating the same piece again and again and so on, and how I relate to it. So there are a few avenues to think about it. And one avenue is a critical one, that there are a lot of composers who do write most of their adult lives the same piece again and again, not necessarily one piece, but very close proximity, and they are in a way working in a field which is narrowly defined, so that in the minute that you hear a small part of their music, you know this is X and this is Y. This is and there is an attempt to attain mastery over an idea. So the idea is a kind of a constant. There is a kind of an earth where you are planted, and you try to make that earth better and clearer, and you are trying to make that field you are working, or the thing you are working on, bloom within the same field. That, for me, is a critical view on that idea, because to some extent, I'm not a believer in mastery. I understand that we have to have good technique, but for me, technique is never separated from what one has to say. And technique is always something that comes as a means and not as an aim. And so the idea of mastering something again and again and again to bring it to a perfection, this kind of a perfectionist view, I'm not interested in that. Why? Because it finds renewal in very, very small and delineated area. So the renewal is very confined, because it is the borders of the idea are always present, and you should not cross them. And so, because you want to master the same field, so you should not change the field because it needs to be mastered. Yeah. That is for me an anathema to the idea of constant growth as an artist. However, there is another avenue to approach this, which means that some ideas are so deep, intricate, and multi-layered that you need a period of many pieces in order to articulate them. It just cannot be articulated within one piece. So you need the time, and you need a wave of pieces to actually manifest the depth of the idea and its magnitude. That, I think, those are the two ways in which one can approach the idea of sameness. And the third one is completely critical, which is that it is a pity that also in a field like ours, which is a resisting field to a lot of the cultural trends, we would submit to a kind of a brand name idea that you would be expected to write as you did before, and when you do not, people will criticize you for this. I absolutely do not take that. One has to emerge, one has to change, and this might take time. There are periods of sameness which are very important. Without them, there is no deepening, and one must say that. One has to deepen, and the deeper the ideas are, you need more time to engage. It's not like a travel where you are a tourist and you're, going from one city to the other. There is a balance of consideration.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe the context in which you were referring to it for me was that I presented two pieces. One was a cello solo and another was a string quartet, and they had very similar materials. And so the domain in which I was exploring those ideas, I think, was perhaps more maybe in like the first avenue that you presented, where you're sort of like creating these very visible borders that you don't want to traverse. And so do you then encourage removing the boundaries to allow for the idea to manifest in as many ways as it can, in as many different idioms or musical languages, or are the boundaries often encouraging growth in a positive way?
I think that those things change. They are not, you cannot give a rule which is static. There is a real conversation between being able to work within confinement or within resistance or being really limited, because that really encourages you to find new way of thinking and to change habits. But that really also encourages you to entrench a lot of habits, because it's a question of going from the form to the material. So if the form is, let's call it the boundary, but when I'm talking about the boundary, it is more inclusive than only the form. It is more like the material, the sound, the thought behind it, the concept. It's actually everything together. So there are very strong advantages for confinement, which one needs to experience and to exercise from time to time. And when I give exercises to my undergraduates, and I give them very clear confinement, and within this confinement some freedom, amazing things come up. Because it's a very, very good way of studying. At a certain point, you are not doing etudes or studying anymore. You want to create something which is more holistic. And for me, to that point belong also the ability and the need and the necessity to break across the barriers that you set. I know that I'm different in that from many other composers who really like to give you the clear field where they work and to take you by the hand to see to what extent their imagination goes. And this is a beautiful trip as well for me, in many cases, to experience such pieces. But in my work, I am doing something different, and I am not interested in showing my handwork and showing the breadth of my imagination or impressing you in any other way. I am interested in creating a kind of an open communication with material that comes from me but has its own life. And so I have to let it guide me how to develop a piece. And many times, or most of the time, it knows better than I about what it wants to do, and it will hopefully surpass what I designated as its border of the field, and I will be forced to invent and to confront something that I didn't know in the beginning of the piece. That's hopefully going to happen, because if the piece is good, it's going to happen. Around the 2/3, usually, unfortunately, this is very traditional. Not unfortunately, it's traditional, but in my work, the golden section has been a huge thing. This is where usually I start getting the communication back from the material. And that's where a lot of the breaches are happening. That is also where I many times are tempted to open a whole new corridor in the house, only to later realize actually that was a dangerous step and it didn't work.
This is something that I'm very interested in, and I feel that it is very difficult to learn to be a good listener of your own materials. And so, what are the cues that typically happen at this 2/3 point through the piece? How do you realize that you should pursue one direction? And is it, like you said, like sometimes trial and error? Sometimes you pursue something where you realize it's completely like perilous or dangerous, as you say? Or do you find that there are several paths which are intriguing and viable options and maybe go through each one successively, or you have to pick one or two? What does this like? What are the cues for you that normally make you realize the piece is starting to speak to you?
Well, it's a gradual emergence of what does it mean that a piece is starting to speak to you? It means that it reveals slowly something is revealed about what is it doing. What am I interested here? What all the material I've written so far is actually what's at stake here? What am I working with? What is the main issue here? What is important? And as it reveals itself, and sometimes the full revelation is only after you heard the piece. And that is sometimes where I actually make big cuts, for example. So those are the cues. Those are not cues as in, technical cues. It's just an emerging understanding of where it's going, which I did not know 10 pages before or 5 pages before, which becomes clearer and clearer. But when you have a kind of a sense, intuition of where something goes, it does suggest a few possibilities. And I've found that around the 2/3 of a lot of my pieces, I have the choice to either close things up or sometimes cross a border and take a very dangerous move of taking the conclusion of what I have understood and intercepted, so to say, in the wake of the material, and make it do something that it even didn't, that it requests to do in order to manifest itself, but that was not originally set up in the beginning of the piece. And that is a very strange threshold, because one has to decide, am I closing it here or am I actually going? And that going forward is absolutely dangerous. And I never miss it. I always go forward because it's true, it might make a piece too long. And I have been struggling with having some of my pieces of the last time, I would cut them later. But I would cut the new thing I've established. I would cut some of the new thing. No, the new thing is there. It's just that when I established it, maybe I took too much time to make the transition and to live within it. And that can be erased later. But I never would like to give up that dangerous decision to let the material go where it really wants to discover something. Because if you created something and it has a kind of a life impulse, and then it wants to realize this life impulse. You created material, and now the material wants to do something, to effectuate, to not only to facilitate. Sorry for the for the political reference. Anyway, so that's how I think about it.
That's very interesting, and I wonder about this aspect of danger that you're referring to. What makes it dangerous for you? Why is it? Why do you perceive it in this sort of in this lens, like through this lens?
For me, music in a way is like inventing life. And I think about it as something very vital about my pieces and the way that they are in the world, almost like creatures or things which are imbued with life. And so if you think about a person who have been told that they will live most of their life, in Europe, and suddenly they realize that their life created in them some kind of a need to go and to Antarctica and be in Antarctica for 6 months, just a silly example. That is the feeling. So something has happened in the material, consequently, over the time that it has been happening, that has directed it to explore something which the material needs the resistance of this exploration in order to come to its full potential. But it is dangerous because to come to your full potential, you always need resistance which is not foreseeable, because we never grow or come to our full potential when we are really comfortable. Comfort is also very, very important, and it's healing, and it gives us a lot of power to do the next jump, which is always slightly dangerous or more dangerous. Yeah? The conversation between those things, again, a conversation, a dialogue, is so important because you get some strength by staying. But then, if the material has enough life, it will behoove you to go further, and that going further must mean that there is some risk. I don't know if I think about Proust and how he wrote his book, very, very slowly. And somebody would say, was there such a dramatic risk here? No. But absolutely there was. The length of it, the stopping of time, it's imbued with risk, from the beginning.
And I as you're speaking about it, I'm thinking about your piece Atara, because I felt that one of the questions that I had about this piece was, for the first maybe half of the piece, maybe 17, 18 minutes, it's instrumental. And since I was listening in headphones, I wasn't anticipating that there was going to be an addition of voices in the second half of the piece. And that felt for me like a very bold, formal decision. And I wonder if that's related to this idea of the piece opening up a new avenue for you, or this dangerous step into what the piece is able to manifest now that you've gone through all of these initial stages.
That is a very interesting question, the way that you put it, because actually it's a kind of a reversed engineering. Actually, the piece started from a text. I mean, let's say the voices started from a text, and I knew that I will use the text from the beginning.
Right.
But what happened was following. So that story of that piece is slightly different. It was not the point where I took the risk, but it was, and I will explain. It's a bit complex, so let me just tackle it
Okay.
from how it happened. So first, I wanted to write an orchestral piece. This was many years ago, before Corona. The orchestral piece was supposed to deal with huge blocks of orchestra sound that are floating or moving in a kind of a irresistible, unstoppable pace. and they have their own motivations of movement which we don't understand. That was my first wish. Then came Corona. And that first wish that I had about the orchestral blocks, they had to do with feeling that we are not recognizing the power of nature. So it was kind of, I was alluding to a huge power, immense power of nature that we have no control on. And that's what I wanted to kind of manifest or enact in that piece. Corona came, and I saw the text of Zohar Eitan, my friend and my collaborator since ages, and I fell in love with that text. I knew that I wanted to take it to the piece. And I asked then the people that wanted to, if I can have two singers, and they said, yeah. I don't remember exactly how it happened, maybe it doesn't matter. Anyway, I then thought about how am I going to create those two pieces together, because they belong to each other. Actually, my feeling about the orchestral piece was almost a premonition about Corona, unfortunately. But I knew also that in the moment that the singer steps into the stage, the orchestra is erased, because that's how we are. That's our perception is always tuned to the human. And so we are all on the face of the singer, and we are all listening to what the singer is doing. So how can I create a piece where the power of nature still sustained, even with the singers there? And they do not take the whole stage, even though they are singing a poem which has a lot of power, which I believe in, which is so illuminating for me, and I want to give it a lot of power. So I don't want to just do, black and white, orchestra and voice, and dichotomy and, ambivalence. No, that is not, not ambivalence, but dialectical positioning. I'm not interested in that. So what do I do? So I had to think about how to bring the voices in a point where the power of nature have already totally established itself and cannot be erased. After 15 minutes of the piece, it cannot be erased, because it's very powerful, and you cannot erase its pacing, you cannot erase its weight, you cannot erase the sound density that you have experienced. And so when the voice comes and it's very flimsy with the cembalo beforehand, there are not only, it's not an opposition, it's just a kind of like the voice is happening in the very small corner of the orchestra. The world of the orchestra includes the voice, but the voice is very far away, and there is a whole transition, how I go from the orchestra, from a huge block of the orchestra into the melody. I just analyzed it in a class a few days ago. I was asked to analyze that point, and so it's a huge and very gradual transition from the blocks to a kind of a melody, where the melody is spilled away to just be one voice, unisono, and then there is a place, but it's always the same kind of melody, very minimal melody, and so that when it's spilled away, it's almost like it got to very far away in a kind of an imaginary space, because we still hear it's the same melody that was in the big blocks. Melody hasn't changed. It just was spilled away from its weight and from its density and from its volume. So it actually imitated the idea of getting far away, because that's what happens when an object gets far away. You're not aware of its full volume, its full weight, and so on. And in that point, when it reaches very, very far away point, the voices come exactly from that point. And so they are included in the huge world of the orchestra, but they are a small, tiny grain in it. And that proportion is then kept.
Here's an excerpt from Chaya's Atara for orchestra and 2 amplified voices. So it's a very different compositional process then, because as you said, it's complex and these 2 pieces kind of converged into one to yield that possibility of peeling away the layers and creating distance.
Well, there were not 2 pieces. I composed them from the beginning.
Right.
As one. This was one piece where there was nature and then the people came.
Right. My apologies. I didn't mean to say 2 pieces, but
No need to apologize. Yeah.
No, but it's really. I'm curious too about when the performance of that piece, when it premiered. Did you have any specific guidance for the singers so that because I know what you're referring to about how we can gravitate towards the face of the singer and how they do have this very kind of imposing presence on stage. Were they visible from the beginning of the piece in a sort of traditional way?
They were sitting and they stood up right before they had to sing. And I think it really worked in the hall. Yeah.
Right. Of course, because the orchestra, as you say, has a very dominating presence that cannot be controlled.
It cannot be erased at that point.
Yes. It has a profound resonance, I suppose, in the memory of the listeners as once the singers begin to sing.
You know, when you are walking for quite a long time in let's say, in sand on the beach, and it's kind of difficult to walk because your legs are constantly sinking into the sand. Then when you suddenly are on a normal road, where you have, resistance to your legs and you can walk very easily, the memory of walking 5 minutes before or 1 minute before is still present, and you feel the change of speed. Here, the pace is not exactly changing, but the sense of weight, the sense of grandeur, the sense of size is really different. The pace is held, which gives you the opportunity to experience how small are the voices within this huge pace that the orchestra needed for its rolling out its own personality, as it were.
I love that analogy of walking in the sand because, of course, it is much more difficult, and so your legs get calibrated to a much higher amount of, I guess, effort that needs to be made to walk. Another experience that am reminded of too is like being on a roller coaster or going in kind of like these very high velocity kinds of entertainment rides. After being on them for maybe a long period of time, your body is kind of still in motion,
Exactly.
and I wonder if that's maybe an analog that can be made as well.
Well, let's put it just generally that I think a lot about the body and how it behaves and what it takes for the body to go through certain things. And that is a huge guideline for me because my music is very much concerned with its own body. And the only way that I can learn about any body is through my own. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that sense that you're referring to about the music having a life of its own and being almost like a creature. And so it makes a lot of sense that the body does play a big role in how you conceive of these ideas. I imagine that hearing the piece in a live space is going to make a lot more sense in terms of the scale that you're referring to, because when you listen in a recording, of course, everything has like very pristine close mics and everything sounds very different than it would in a live space. Because I feel that the scale that you're referring to translates a little bit, but I can still hear the voice like right here. So it's a little bit, I imagine,
It's
different.
not about it's not about you hearing the voice very, very quietly, or you
Mm,
hear the voice in the recording as I meant it and
I
as
see.
one hear it in the, of course, any piece of music, and one could maybe say, especially my own work, sounds much better live. But there are a lot of advantages to recordings where you can really control everything. And I don't feel that what I'm talking about in Atara is bound to, no, not to what you say, because it's not about the voice sounds pianissimo or anything like that. The writing of the voice is making it intimate. It may you hear it right here because it's very intimate. It almost touches you, even though it is very far away. But it transmits a feeling. It's not trying to scream towards you. It's actually talking very much to itself, and you are able to hear it here, but because of all the things that were before, you know that where it's talking from is very far away. Yeah. Did I say it right? It's a
Yes.
very illogical mathematical equation.
No, but I completely understand what you mean. The perception of space is not necessarily determined by literal distances. There are other
Exactly.
kind of perceptual cues that help us to perceive these things.
This is very, very nicely put. So, what we can create in music is a very paradoxal and warped and sometimes extremely deeply expressive and liberated from the normal confines of space. And we can create new spaces. And I'm very intrigued by that. Yeah, so thank you for saying it this
No,
way. Yeah.
yeah, I'm also interested in this idea of warped or distorted spaces. Can you talk a little bit about that in your music and guess how the idea of like a real body translates to these creature bodies inside warped spaces?
Oh God, that is not a small subject, and that's probably not so good to discuss abstractly, but to discuss. I can give
Okay.
an example that I've given in the last time, a few times. So I wrote a string quartet, which is called Azov, and which was dedicated to Arditi in their 50th anniversary. You can find it on my YouTube channel.
Yes. I'll put
Yeah,
it in the description too.
wonderful. And in this piece, something very interesting, exactly in the terms that we've talked about, is happening. And it is the moment of greatest risk, and it is the moment of the wrapped space. So what happens around the 2/3 of the piece, but it's actually closer to the half, is that you have lines that are going up, and they are always opening a huge spectrum because they go up as one line or as four lines from the bottom of the cello to the highest register of the violins. They are very slow, and their way of going up is very elegant and very. People compare them to sirens, and I absolutely don't agree, because each of the line has a character and it goes on its own volition, so to say. Nothing to say about, mechanical sirens. No, no similarity. It's a too fast categorization that people do when they don't know how to relate to music. They hold on to the closest thing they can find,
Right.
which is sometimes the most wrong idea. Anyway, so those lines go, and in their end, they open a huge space of silence. It's almost like when they disappear, we still hear their continuation. And that continuation and disappearance needs a lot of time in order to kind of clean the air completely. And that cleaning of the air is a very, how can I say, is full of anticipation, but it's not nervous at all. It actually is a kind of it's a kind of a ritardando in time, because you need to take the time until all resonance are gone. And in those places you have one colenio battuto, one grain of sound, the shortest, or maybe two, something that sounds like it's totally negligible. It's like a remnant of something that was before. It's a piece of dust in the air. It's nothing that one can see as a meaningful thing. That process, that kind of, not process, but that kind of long event takes place over quite a long time. There are a few appearances of those lines coming, disappearing over a long time, breaks, 1 grain, 2 grains, 3 grains. And then there is a huge break, and suddenly we are only on the grain. And all the instrument, instead of being on a huge spectrum of the ambitus, are focused on a chord, on a triad, which is only in middle register, where everything sounds very much together. So all the quartet is on that, second octave above the middle C, around there. And suddenly the grains are starting to sing. And they are only in colenio battuto, and that colenio battuto hits, those colenio battuto hits are different from one instrument to the other, and it's very, very meticulously notated. It's constantly retardanding or acceleranding, and the pacing is constantly different, but they are articulating actually a small harmonic sentence that then repeats and repeat and repeat with small additions and with small kind of decorations, etc. It has its own development, but that idea that a huge, huge space is open, and inside it there is the dust point, and suddenly we are only on the dust point, and it opens a micro world, which we are able to zoom in. That is a wrapped space, because in the normal space we wouldn't be able to, if we are still in the large ambitus, we cannot zoom into such a small world. But the music allows us to zoom in and to just suddenly be confined to 1 millimeter, where before we were in a kilometer length. So that's just a small example. There are probably many categories and many ways of wrapping time in other pieces.
Here's an excerpt from Etzov for String Quartet by Chaya Czernowin. I was wondering too, and I think that this maybe you've already answered the question by describing this, how these small moments might create foreshadowing for your music as like potentialities in the form. So hearing these small microscopic elements somehow then presented with new life and with a much bigger zoomed in amount of space and focus. That I think that that was something that I was hearing in Atara as well. There were these moments which, for whatever reason, I don't know why they stood out to me so much, but there are a handful of piano notes that are like bim, 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 something like that. I can't remember the exact intervals, but it's something like that. And so I thought, what is the significance of that? Because I didn't hear the piano so closely in the, leading up to that moment, and it seemed that it sat on top of the entire orchestra. And I wonder if it has that sort of like quality of being a potentiality, because it seems that later on in the piece it gets unified with these large brass like chords that maybe have a parallel to this these particles that you're referring to in Etzov. I don't know. Maybe I'm making connections that are not there.
You can make any connection you want, and it's all, I mean, what I say is very persuasive and convincing, but it's only one way of reading
Right.
my work, yeah? And there are probably, hopefully, many other ways, and also ways which are critical about, you know, vis-a-vis the way that I, only today there is actually a very, very long article in Van magazine about the perception of my work, and it does talk about the problem of reading this work. So yeah, your idea that a part of your reading might be wrong is not exactly, I don't know. You can, if there is something where you can go through and prove something in the score, then you already have a thesis, you know? Yeah. But I don't see the piano, for me, from my point of view, the piano, the small elements of the piano, they connect with me with the cembalo later. So they are actually the potentialities of the material that belongs to the voices later.
I see.
Maybe that was in your idea as well.
Possibly, because I was sort of starting to perceive this difference or dichotomy between continuous or continuum. What is the plural of continuum? Continua. So, like the glissandi, for example, throughout the orchestra as having, infinite potential, and sustain on one single note as having a different kind of potential. And I felt that
Right.
there were these two worlds colliding, and the piano seemed to me to foreshadow the coming of, the staticization, I don't know if that's a word, of these like glissandi kind of
Exactly.
ideas.
I see. Yeah. So the piano is kind of like a break,
It's
a
like
small break.
it's like a small
But
break that tells you something is going to change.
it will break. I mean like in a car,
Right.
a gear. Like
Yeah.
so, because it is not confirming to the constant move of the orchestra, because it's it's for a moment sustained into it's a Momentaufnahme in the German. It's a shot of a moment, whereas everything else is a movie.
Right.
But that is a picture, a small picture. And
Exactly.
in that sense, it kind of foresee the stopping into the drone, which becomes a point of reference.
Right. Yeah, so that's sort of what that particular moment, that's how I was reading that particular moment. And I didn't mean to say that, reading anyone's music in any particular way could be wrong, although maybe a composer might feel uncomfortable with some readings.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I was also curious too. I know that you mentioned that technique is not it's a means rather than an end. And so I was curious about the role of glissandi because I feel that for me, listening to your music, I read them as I said, sort of like infinite potentialities and not necessarily like a mechanical siren. So I'm not sure, how someone could listen to your music and read it that
No,
way,
no,
but
it was just in the piece Azov.
I
It,
see.
it was just in that
Got it, got it,
specific
got it, got
piece
it.
yeah, in that place that I talked about, that I read,
Right.
that kind of reading. Yeah.
But I feel that there are moments in your music, and because I've been sort of immersed in several of your pieces, I can't say which one specifically it was, but I feel that there are these moments where it's like you see a glissando, but then there are these like moments where you pull out a particular frequency to create these sort of like smeared chords out of the infinite potential. Is that sort of how is that one way in which you use glissandi, and how do glissandi function for you?
Um, can you extend what you meant about the smeared chords?
Yeah, so I guess I'm having a hard time putting it into words because I see the image of it happening in my mind. But so I imagine like if a glissando is on a path from low to high, then there may be certain points that are selected throughout that trajectory which are allowed to become sustains, and then it becomes like a polyphony by drawing out particular points from itself, almost like a rubber band where you can stretch out particular moments from it or particular sections. So it has this sort of like quality.
Yeah, so sometimes I want the sound to be almost like an object that I can really work on with my hands and gestalt and kind of form. And that forming, I think that's what you are talking about. Forming of a body out of a glissando. That's something that that's how in the age of 25 I started with that kind of feeling. And it came to me through looking at the birds, a cloud of birds flying, which I really wanted to capture. The birds in the North Sea. I think forgot the name of the bird, but huge bands of birds, thousands of them, kind of exercise flying together, and they create. Everybody who is on my social media knows that I always post this kind of clouds of birds, or other people post always on my social media. Whenever they see it, they put it on my because they know that I have a special interest in that. That interest goes to the age of 25, where I was in the North Sea, and suddenly I saw that thing, and it was for me like a discovery of, I mean, it was like a present from some force, because I didn't know it existed. That thousands of birds create this changing, constantly changing cloud, and at any moment in this cloud, it is so amazing to see, and so complex, and has so many layers, but it constantly changing. The moment you understood, you wrapped it around your eye around it, it's totally different already. That kind of infinite change, and un, un, unstoppable and uncatchables, yeah, um, unpredictable too, change, which always makes sense, is something I'm still fascinated with. And I don't remember your question right now. If you remind me, I went too much into the birds.
No, no, and I love the imagery of the cloud of birds. I think that
Now I remember you. Yeah. So, so it depends on your material. It's not always so ethereal. It's not always, sometimes like in the piece Ash, which is a very short orchestral piece, but very, very full. from all the range, from all the range of the orchestral mass, I pull the middle register, and the feeling is almost like somebody is pulling your stomach. It's not the head, it's not the legs, it's the stomach, and the stomach's kind of pulled in or out from the mass of the. So yeah, working with glissando for me is the feeling of ceramics. And then I'm not doing music, I'm sculpting sound rather.
And I get that feeling from your music, and it feels like it has that very tactile and textural quality to it when the parts interact in this way. And the image of the birds is actually, I wasn't aware that this was one of your things. So it's nice to know about that, to have a reference, not to sort of like relate all, because as you say, like, of course,
It's very, very
every piece
early.
has its own considerations
I'm
and
3 days older than 25.
so no, but I think it's a very captivating and evocative image that I think, as you say, it is very ephemeral and fleeting, and the second that you think you understand it, as you said, it's already different and it already presents new realities or new ways of calibrating how you think about it. And so I was very struck by the textural qualities and all of the nuances of instrumentation, of timbre, of all of these different things that appear in your music. And so I also wanted to ask you about this premiere you have coming up at the end of the month. No, that is going to be performed in LA. Can you talk a little bit about this piece and maybe tell people who are listening the background and maybe your process and yeah, anything you'd like to say
Oh,
about that piece?
all right. I would love to. The piece will be performed in Los Angeles by the LA Philharmonic in the Green Umbrella series with Sophia Ehrenberg and Eliza Bag. I'm not sure that which version of the piece they are doing. We are discussing it right now because the piece has two versions. One, I will maybe first explain about the piece and then talk about the versions. So the piece is called No, a lament for the innocent. I wanted to write this piece in 2016 when Trump was separating families. And for me, that family separation story was extremely painful because I'm a mom too. Well, I'm a person too. I'm a human being too. It's to think about babies of 1 year old or children of 3 years old separating from their mom. It makes my stomach turn. And then it took a very, very long time for the piece to kind of find its way to reality. And Corona came. And then, I mean, yeah, I was busy with other pieces. It just took time to manifest itself. And it came last year, or, you know. And as you know, last year we had the war in Israel, my native land, and the repercussion of this war, the terrible 7th of October massacre with all the hostages, and then the terrible, terrible revenge that my countrymen are doing, which is non-ending and is creating a huge, I'm sorry to use the name, but I believe it is justified. It's a huge it's a Holocaust in Gaza. I know that this name evokes a lot of opposition, but I think it's justified. Holocaust is not only kept for Jews. Anyway, that all came and I was about to write the piece. And my feeling was I want to write for change a very short piece, really not more than 15 minutes. The piece is 16 minutes. And this is a protest piece. It's a piece where I allow myself to just scream, no. And what I learned that I've done in the piece is following. That scream of no comes from down, from the stomach. But it is not easily coming out to be reborn into the air, out. So I have two orchestral group, each of them with 25 people, and each of them has a singer. And the two orchestral group are almost like two limbs that are swimming up together. They are antiphonal. They are kind of a body that is trying to bring itself to emerge as the scream of no. That is the piece. And in the end, there are a few words. Don't take my child away, don't take my child away, don't take my child, don't, no. That's it. So not a text, not a literary text, just that very original feeling that made me, and which unfortunately every mother feels when she is losing a child, a family. Everybody knows what a loss means. Anyway, so there are two versions to that piece, and the one is the original version, the same singer with the same orchestral group recording the second orchestra, and that second orchestra coming from the end of the hall. And so that when they no, they kind of work together to get the scream out. There is another version when these are live orchestras, 25 people here, 25 people far away or on the stage but separated, and they are working together. Los Angeles originally wanted to do the first and original version, but it's a conversation with the union about recordings and so on. We are not sure. It's possible that we will have two orchestras and two singers.
Well, I see, and it sounds like a very powerful work, and I think that it's something that can resonate with audience, particularly right now in the
Right now.
moment that we're living in. I'm also a parent, and so this idea of being separated from my children is heart-wrenching, and so it, I guess, goes back to what you were referring to earlier about, your music wanting to be more holistic and not just about, exploring particular techniques in a vacuum. And I really appreciate that about your work. I feel that it goes beyond what the materials say by themselves. And I think that this is an experience that will be very moving for people.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, thank you, Chaya, so much for taking the time. This was a wonderful conversation, and I feel that I understand your music at least a little bit more. I hope that this was a valuable conversation for you as well.
Thank you. It was. I enjoyed it, and thanks for taking the time and doing this together with me.
All right. Well, take care, Chaya. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon.
Bye bye.